But I wanted to start our show off today with good news about our president, good news about the economy. There's a few other things I want to talk to when Lana gets on. But as a mortgage loan officer, a professional mortgage loan officer, it is incumbent upon me to know a thing or two about the economy and how it works. Now, there are a million moving pieces that go on with the economy. So, I don't even think the experts are experts in the economy, but there are people who know more than others. And there is some news that came out regarding not just the economy, but Joe Biden and the great job that he's doing. But let's start off with Moody's Analytics. The Economist have spoken. This is an article from The Hill. President Biden is, I'm sorry, this is a article from Midas News. The Economist has spoken. President Biden is better for the economy than Donald Trump. According to the analysts from the Moody's Analytics, Trump's Maganomics economic plan slashes taxes for the rich, spike import tariffs, and institute mass deportation immigrant workers would trigger a recession by mid-2025 with an economy that would slow to an average of 1.3 annual growth versus 2.1 under Biden. This is a quote from Mark Zandi, the chief economist of Moody's Analytics. He says Biden's policies are better for the economy. Trump's plan to fund the government through higher import tariffs would cause companies to pass their increased costs onto consumers, reaccelerating inflation that has been steadily cooling during Biden's terms. Short article. I want to read everything on here because there's some really good facts. According to Moody's, next year under a Trump administration, inflation would rise from a current 3.3% to 3.6%, well above the 2.4% forecast for next year under Joe Biden. The U.S. would have 3.2 million fewer jobs and a 4.5 unemployment rate at the end of Trump's term, compared to a Biden 26 straight months of unemployment under 4%, which hasn't happened in over 50 years. The U.S. economic growth in 2023 under Biden surpassed China for the first time in 40 years. And finally, increased tariffs on imports and the resulting higher inflation would also dramatically increase the value of the dollar, leading to fewer exports of U.S. products, harming manufacturers and their employees. What they did not mention in this article was that the Trump tax cuts would be extended next year, which are set to expire, which would add a ton to the debt. And there's something else that just came out recently, that former President Trump ran up the national debt by about twice as much as President Biden, according to a new analysis of their fiscal track records. The winner of November's elections have certainly an outlook that they're going to have to figure out how they're going to proceed with the economy. Our debt does continue to climb, but in the 4 years that Donald Trump was president, he doubled the amount of debt that President Biden has in not even 4 years. In fact, Rachel Maddow did a piece on this the other day. There's a couple of clips that we pulled from that segment because it was a pretty long segment, and I suggest anybody go out and look at it. But the first one is she's going to talk about Biden's accomplishments, and then she'll talk about the debt.
We just had the best year of American job creation in the 21st century. The last time we had a streak this long of unemployment below 4%, it was the early 1960s. Under Joe Biden, the U.S. has the best economy in the world, literally the envy of the world. In fact, the World Bank just said that the U.S. economy is so good, it's actually stabilizing the whole world economy. The U.S. stock market keeps hitting new records and then breaking those records and then hitting new ones that are even higher. Crime is at 50-year lows. We just had the largest single-year drop in the murder rate that we have ever recorded. And President Biden keeps signing big legislation that's good for the economy, that's good for the business climate. And he has been able to do it, miracle of all miracles, with bipartisan support, and that includes the big infrastructure bill and domestic manufacturing of computer chips and all of these other things. I mean, this is the kind of business landscape hellscape business leaders have been suffering through under Joe Biden. Headlines like these. Corporate profits hit record high as economy boomed in fourth quarter of 2023. Or this one. U.S. corporate profits soar with margins at widest since 1950. Or this one. Money Watch. U.S. companies just had their best year since before most of us were born. Oh, the poor business guys. They really need Trump back, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? Everything is working, for the economy so well that corporations are having record profits. But I think, as we all know, for these corporations and the people who run these corporations, that's still not good enough. They are always trying to find a way to take more money out of our pocket, put it more into their pocket. And again, it's not good enough. And even though they're having record profits now, what they want are these massive tax cuts that are going to wind up putting more money in their pocket. Let's say the economy even goes backwards. People would say, well, that doesn't make sense. We're already just reporting how the economy is going to go backwards. It won't matter to them because the tax cuts will be so significant that even if their business slows down, they're still going to make out. My guess is these guys think about money 24/7, and they've already done the math on how this is going to work. And, unfortunately, from the 70s on, is that it's gotten worse and worse and worse. The gap between the worker and the person that owns the business, or the people who are at the top who run these businesses, the gap has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And the reason why is because legislation continues to be passed to help these people. And it's not just Republicans. Democrats have been in bed with the CEOs and the billionaires and the millionaires. However, you do see a shift a bit. You see a shift of people on the Democratic Party who are saying enough. The Bernie Sanders, the Elizabeth Warrens, people like that who are a little bit more in the, actually a lot bit more in the progressive movement of saying, okay, enough is enough. You guys have enough money. Now it's time to start giving back to the people, because the idea under Ronald Reagan, the idea of trickle-down economics was the sucker plan for the sucker people who voted for that guy. When they said, guys, listen, give us more money and we're going to, shove it down to you guys. And sure, you might find a couple of corporations here or there that actually lived up to their word. But for the most part, you're not going to find that anywhere. It just doesn't really happen. It has been proven time and time again that the so-called trickle-down economics just flatly does not work. But let's get to the other segment. Rachel Maddow was discussing what I just brought up about the debt and the deficit.
And even if they want to say, oh, it's not about the business climate, it's about being fiscally responsible. It's just that we're so worried about the debt and the deficit, and that's why we want to go back to Trump and get rid of Joe Biden. I mean, tell me what the rationale is there in reality. Tell me what the rationale is. Because the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, one of these nonpartisan fiscal watchdog groups, put this out today, which kind of puts a fine point on it.
Real quick, I want everybody to look at these numbers. So non-COVID debt approved dollars under Donald Trump was $4.8 trillion. And then the CARES Act and other COVID relief was 3.67, which equals a total of 8.4 trillion that was added to the debt. Non-COVID for Joe Biden is 2.2 trillion. And the American Rescue Plan, which was his COVID plan, was 2.1 trillion, which added 4.3 trillion to the debt. Now, the one thing to note here, if you look at the non-COVID side, so I think we all agree that the COVID money was necessary to an extent. If anybody really would like to argue that maybe we gave too much, I don't know if that's a terrible argument. I think maybe there was an overreaction, but there's a lot of people that would argue that no, it may not have even been enough. Again, there's an argument for both sides on that one, but I do think that most economic experts would say that too many of the COVID relief packages, maybe some went to some people who didn't necessarily need it. We know that on those PPP loans that went out to companies under the Trump administration that were distributed to a lot of companies that had to shut down during COVID, a lot of companies that had absolutely no business taking those loans took those loans. I think people like Tom Brady's, even his corporation, and some major corporations took those loans, and when they got busted, they did wind up giving the money back, which tells you they did not need the money to begin with. But anyway, my main point is that as we look at the non-COVID debt that was approved under both presidents, Donald Trump's was 4.8 trillion, and a lot of that had to do with his tax cuts that set to expire next year. Joe Biden's is 2.2 trillion. That actually went to numerous different bipartisan plans that help the American people, that put our jobs record and our unemployment record at a 50-year low. It went to infrastructure. It went to the PACT Act. It went to the CHIPS and Science Act. It went to so many different things that had a return on investment. Donald Trump doubled the amount of debt to this country in non-COVID dollars, mostly because of a tax cut for the rich people. And again, it's pretty simple economics. When you continue to cut taxes for the people who make the most amount of money, our debt and our deficit is going to continue to rise. So that's not to say that the debt and deficit does not go up under Democrats. It certainly does. But if you look at the history of, especially the recent history, if you look all the way back to Ronald Reagan and beyond, you are going to see that Ronald Reagan left office and he added debt. Then George H.W. Bush added debt. Bill Clinton comes into office, completely wipes out the debt, and there was a surplus. There was more money coming in than more money going out when he left office. Then, of course, George W. Bush gets us into wars. All kinds of issues go on with George W. Bush. And then, of course, we have the big housing crash. And it was one of the biggest economic disasters in the history of our country. And then, of course, Barack Obama had to take that over. He had to spend money up front. Now, it makes it sound like, oh, of course, you're going to sit there and make excuses for Barack Obama. Any president, if Donald Trump were the president at that time, he would have had to have done whatever Barack Obama did to get us out of the mess, which he did. From all economic experts, what they said, did a pretty good job of getting us out of the, catastrophe that we were in at a pretty good rate, at a pretty good pace. So Obama leaves office with a good economy. Donald Trump takes over, and admittedly, during the first 3 years of his presidency, the economy was good. He didn't do anything to destroy the economy. He didn't do anything to help it, but he didn't do anything necessarily to destroy it until COVID hit. And his tax cuts for the rich, that ultimately added to the debt, added to the deficit, because that's not going to take place right away. Of course, that's going to take a little bit of time. But COVID hit, and again, wouldn't matter who the president was. We were going to suffer through inflation that was high. We were going to suffer through all kinds of economic issues that were going to hurt not just us, but it hurt the entire world. So when Donald Trump left, Joe Biden had to take over another disaster from another Republican president. Now, again, I want to go back. It wasn't all Donald Trump's fault about the economy, but the way he handled COVID was a complete an utter disaster. And that is probably the reason why he is not president today. Had he handled COVID the way any normal, good leader would have handled COVID, there's a horrible possibility that he might have been able to beat Joe Biden. I mean, hell, he almost beat him with the disaster that he had at COVID. So if he actually did a really good job and there were a lot less deaths, there's a good possibility he'd still be president. But Rachel was talking here. I'm sorry, Rachel, didn't mean to interrupt you. So let's get back to her and finish out her thought.
Right. That's who added what to the debt. When you compare Trump's term in office with Joe Biden's term in office. And no, you can't blame COVID. They actually break out the COVID spending. That's the bit in the lighter red color there. So yes, Donald Trump and Joe Biden both spent on the pandemic. They had to. But even if you wipe that out, Trump added trillions more to the debt and the deficit than Biden did, regardless of COVID. And maybe you don't particularly care about the deficit and the debt, but business guys almost always say they do. And so what's the rationale along those lines for supporting Trump over Biden?
Again, the rationale, the only one I can think of is that they either did the math or they think they did the math that works out best for them. And the math for them is massive tax cuts puts more money in my pocket. I don't care how bad the economy is. In fact, there are quarterly phone calls that people could hear. So you could go and listen to that. These CEOs have to go on every quarter and they have to report their profits, loss, whatever it is. And there were a lot of people during the COVID times. There was somebody who was brazen enough, and I'm just thinking of it. So I wish I had thought about it earlier, but so I don't know exactly who it was. But he was brazen enough to say, times are good when the economy is good, but times are better when the economy is bad, is what they say. And, so that is what tells me that if they're rooting more for the tax cuts, that it's better for their pocket than it would be if the economy was thriving, which is really sad and pathetic. And you would think, just being an American citizen, if you truly are a patriot, that you are not just looking out for you and your kids and their kids' future, that you're literally looking out for everybody. But we've got to a point in this country where people are so damn greedy, and it is now a dick swinging contest about who makes more money. And I can't have this guy making more money than I do. And it's an entire world that none of us have experienced. There's a really good possibility none of us will. That doesn't mean any of us are schlubs. That doesn't mean any of us are below those people. Quite frankly, we're not. It's just some people happen to make it in life to a certain degree that 99% of people do not make it. And really, most of those people who make it to the top, they don't have any other life other than money, 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 money. Kid, whatever. Sure, I'll get to you. Money, money, money. Wife, sure, I'll get to you. I got my mistress over here too. I'll get to her when I have a money, money, money. And that's really what it comes down to, in my opinion. If anybody else has a different opinion, let me know.